welcome to the Startup Grind.
Brian, so without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Cal McAllister. Come on up, Cal.
Thanks, man.
Get that for you. There you go.
Thanks. I was never a starter in high school, so that's a box I had never checked.
Yes. We're the rock star. It was funny, I've told this story a few times, but I interviewed Glenn Kelman a couple years ago, and this was the most nervous part of the whole meeting, was just that. He was so nervous about walking through the crowd and people standing up and yelling and screaming for him, so it's quite funny. We used to sit down and did that.
Doesn't feel like I've earned it yet. I'm glad we didn't wait till the end. I'm glad you got that out of your system.
Exactly. So again, for those of you who've not been to a Startup Grind event, it's truly just a simple interview between two people. We'll sit here for 45-ish minutes, and then we'll have an open Q&A at the end. So hold your questions to the end. Again, feel free to get up and get wine or beer or anything you want. They're not going to interrupt us. It's obviously videotaped, so watch that in about 10 days or so when we post it online. But enjoy yourself, and honestly, if you have a really burning question in the middle of the interview, ask it. It's not going to kill anyone. So Cal, thank you for being.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
It's fun to be here. I'm excited about it. I feel like these are my people after being agency side for a while, after somebody who started an agency and worked with only the people that could afford us, which is the version of early agency life, and then for the last several years work with some of the bigger companies that didn't really feel like my place anymore. So the startup space is really where I'm truly excited to be. So it's good.
Yeah, no, that's where lots of innovation happens and crazy things happen. So I obviously talked to you a bit, just in the last 20 minutes or so. What I really found interesting is just moving here, just literally moving here, and then several years later starting a company.
Yeah.
With really fairly small network to start a company, especially in what you do.
Yeah.
So I'd love to kind of hear the reasoning behind just making that move of coming to Seattle, and then kind of open up some other questions. But why don't you give us a...
Yeah. So out of college, I grew up in the Midwest. I am from Detroit. I went to Ohio State for undergrad. I wrote for the Chicago Tribune for 2 or 3 years right out of undergrad. They weren't as excited about making things up as I was, and they asked me to stop making things up. I started freelancing for an advertising agency. They liked it when I made stuff up, but I was also pretty bad at it. So I went back to school after college, a little portfolio school in Atlanta called the Creative Circus. It's a 2-year program. After about a year and a half, I was already 27 or 28 years old and a couple years older and had a little bit more life experiences. So my student portfolio came together earlier than some. I put the portfolio together, sent it out to 4 or 5 different companies, and before I sent them out, I ranked them. Advertising was booming, so a heartbeat could get you a job in 1999. And so there were a handful of offers, but I had already ranked them, and this little agency called Hammerquist and Halverson was top of my list. I'd never been to Seattle. And my business partner now at Wexley, Ian Cohen, was the hiring creative director, and we hit it off, and I moved out here sight unseen, and 2 months later he moved down to Portland and totally bailed on me. But we stayed in touch and then wanted to open Wexley after that. But Seattle was a weird place for me because in the Midwest, it's, whether you know it or not, it's a very networky area. So you give business to friends, and bartenders give you beers after they get to know you, and you can go to Wrigley for a baseball game on Wednesday, and then you'll go out to the bar on Thursday, and on Friday that guy might be your roommate because and out here it was a big adjustment because I am a pretty social guy, and the advertising industry out here doesn't hang out. We don't get together. There are award shows once a year. We get together and we're jealous of each other, and then we make fun of each other, pick on each other for another 364 days, and then we pretend like we didn't do that for a while. So when I first moved out here, I had sort of that Chicago mentality, and I said, let's go to happy hour on Thursday. And they said, awesome. I was like, what are you guys doing tomorrow? And everybody was like, whoa, back off. We got a kayak. And so it was hard. There wasn't a natural network until as I stayed a little bit longer, I realized that the transplants here were actually where some of the network comes from. And if you can make friends with somebody who went to Laurelhurst Elementary, then maybe you'll have a local friend for longer.
Yeah, absolutely true. Right. And you know, you're a copywriter at heart,
Yep.
right? That's the core of probably what you love to do, or
Yep.
at least used to.
Still do, yeah.
Why a copywriter? Like, what's like? I've never like hung out with like a copywriter. I've had people hung out with that copyright, but they're not copywriters.
Yeah, well, that's what, when I told people when I first moved out here that I was a copywriter, they're like, hey, seeing a circle guy, that's pretty cool. And that wasn't it. It really is just, I found it easiest for me to communicate in longer form through college. I don't have the discipline to write anything more than 10,000 words, but I found it easier to entertain and get a message across in emails or notes, or back then it was letters, and was sort of the foundation of creatively taking people through a story and sending some messaging and having things resonate with them. And I think that sort of drew me towards reporting. And then as an advertising writer where you have no rules, really, it was the opportunity to become, I didn't realize there was that job. I thought when I was in college that the people at Nike made the Nike commercials, so you had to go be a shoe guy.
Yeah.
And so there was an education.
And if you had it to do all over again, would you still be a copywriter?
I would still be a copywriter because I think one of the terrific skills, going all the way back to journalism as a major or communications degree, is being able to take a whole lot of information and influence and people's messaging to you and intent and distilling it down. And in all communities, I think there's nothing more important than being able to be super simple in your messaging from the beginning. And that's a skill that a copywriter has. It's not really about weaving these long tails as much as being a good copywriter. I think if you can get something down to almost nothing and then do some things around it. So it was a terrific, I'm not a strong numbers guy. It was a good place for me to start. And I think there's always a job for someone who can write or deliver messaging at any level of any business. So
Yeah.
I think it's an important skill. So I was drawn to it, yeah.
Yeah. And tell us the starting of a company. I mean, like you said, you're two copywriters starting a company, no business guy.
Super dumb.
Super dumb. Like, what was the thought behind that? Like, how old were you when you did that? How old were you?
We decided to open the business when I was 29. We actually opened it when I was 31.
Okay. So, 31 years old, had some life experience, that's for sure. What would the thing that you would have done differently when you were starting that first year or two? What would you like? God, I wish I would have. Was there any wish I would have?
I wish I wouldn't have. Well, so this is a total double-edged sword. I wish I wasn't so impatient to open an agency, because I wasn't opening an agency because I hated my bosses. I wasn't opening an agency because my ideas weren't getting, like the traditional reason people open an agency is because their ideas aren't getting where they need to be. I opened an agency because people hated the jobs, my peers hated their jobs so much. And this is supposed to be a fun and interesting business. Sure. But where I could have and really would have benefited more is working on some bigger accounts to understand how the industry worked beyond this town. I had an idea about Chicago. Chicago is a frozen meat and instant potatoes consumer packaged good town. San Francisco technology. So I had sort of a very shallow tertiary view, but I didn't have any relationships. And we started Wexley with not a single client. Like, we decided to open the agency, and it was sort of like, what do you want to do today? Because we don't have anything to work on.
Wow.
And it was just, I had an urgency. The reason I say it was kind of double-edged is because if I didn't have that, then I might still be talking about it. Yeah. So you kind of have to be a little dumb. It would have been, I wouldn't change much. I probably would have spent another year working on bigger stuff, because it's this industry, you get car accounts because you knew a guy when you used to work on the soda account, and it might have been a little bit different. We'd have been bigger faster if that was what we were trying to do. Yeah.
And again, why don't you kind of tell the Wexley, the 45-second elevator pitch.
Sure.
Like, who you guys were, but
yeah,
give us that.
We're in R for another 20-some days. We'll get into that in a bit.
Okay. Exactly.
So the idea behind Wexley, and the reason that we have a ridiculous name that was made up, Ian was flipping through a phone book. We were on T-Mobile, so although I'm a 13-year customer. It was a terrible connection, couldn't understand a word he was saying. And he landed on Wesley, and I said, what's Wexley? And he said, sounds like a school for girls. And then we just told too many people, and they said, you have to do that. And we've known that it's, and I say this a lot, but it's deflected millions of dollars of business every year.
Every year, exactly.
But what we also knew as marketers, what we had to do is our job is to create curiosity for brands and to have people invite the messaging. So it was very clear early when we would say, we're Wexley School for Girls. And we were kind of making fun of some other agencies in town. It was not cool to be McAllister Cohen. Nobody was doing that. Yeah. But people were doing names that meant something and had to, but I don't know anybody, and that may just be a shallow knowledge, but who did something that meant absolutely nothing. But it created such curiosity, which is what we want to do for the companies that we work for, that they would say, what is Wexley School for Girls? And I would say, we're a non-traditional ad agency with a little bit more grace. But sure. But that's really what it was about, was creating curiosity, which we still do.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the first time I heard it, I obviously had no idea what it was. Yep. But as most people, I don't know what they do.
Some would say that was the flaw.
If there was a flaw, that could have been it. And you guys grew, you should explain that. I didn't realize that you were I knew you grew almost every year, but just kind of regurgitate those facts you told me.
Yeah, our
path to growth of the company. I was really, it's truly amazing, because most companies don't do that, but it's just super consistent, right?
Yeah, it really was, and the kind of work that we did, we tend to, if you know Wexley's work, we tend to try and do things not always in traditional media. We like to take advantage of channels that people have, so when we worked for ESPN, we knew we were going to make TV commercials, but we tried to make them more interesting. And we started with just the two of us, and then took a year to get some traction, and then we convinced moms who were ready to get back into the workforce, who were friends of ours, and other people who were on the island of misfit toys. But each year, in the early years, it's kind of easy to double your business because you're starting at zero, and then $500 is easy to turn into $1,000, so super impressive. But over the last 15 years, we only had 1 year, we ended up with about 42, 43 people. We only had 1 year where we had 10% growth. Everything else was around 20% growth, and our profitability was only lower than 20% for that one bad 2014 year. So, so we're not a business in trouble. We have lost massive clients and got massive clients, and I think agencies are always in a state of rebuilding and pursuit. But it's not like we couldn't recover from where we are, and it was a healthy business in the big picture. We're going to have a bad November and December. It was not being able to agree on how to pull out of that and what the new direction of the company was going to be. Historically, we've always been the company that would do idea first. So when we started, we had no media company, no media department, because we wanted to say, well, maybe the idea is a race car, or maybe the idea is a hot air balloon race, or maybe it's a Superbowl commercial, not sure. But we didn't want to be tied to an execution before we started. And that was a principle that we did that stayed with us until today. And so when YouTube came out, we were a business back then. Nobody in this room remembers that. But people said, you guys should be a YouTube video making company. And then when Facebook came out, they said, you should make Facebook apps because you guys do this quirky, but we never let the medium drive what we wanted to do. We let the ideas drive what we wanted to do. Yeah. And that's how we ended up being successful and having that growth, because we couldn't be hitched to a technology. We were constantly able to move around and just let creativity drive, our solutions.
And how do you find people in that business? I mean, because those are they're somewhat, some of those are definitely non-traditional people.
Yeah.
Some are traditional, but how did you find your people? Obviously, what was your method to that madness?
Well, our Wexley staffers, there was table stakes, which you need to be a creative person. Our CFO may be the most creative person in the building and probably the most important that he was. Sure. Our copywriters, art directors, we knew that you were going to be good at what you did. And then, like I said from the beginning, we wanted to make an agency where people wanted to be and loved their jobs. And that's a pretty easy filter. I think that you can as you talk to people and you understand their motivations, which is what we really got better at judging, is when people's motivations were broader success for the business and cultural success and humble, and they started to really present themselves. And we hired very slowly and worked our people harder than I'm sure they wanted to work, though everybody, I think, liked their jobs. I know liked their jobs. It took a while to get a job at Wexley, and there were a lot of references, and you would freelance for a little bit, and then we have a policy where after 90 days, to test that, everybody in the building, when you get hired, was offered a $3,000 check since 2006 or 7. The $3,000 check at the time was 10% of the starting salary for a college kid, so it was a material amount of money. And it was also how much it would cost us to fire you if you weren't going to work out. So because it took a while to get that job, and then after 90 days, we would offer that check to you and say, look, if you're not into it, split. Take it. It's much easier for us to end this now if our records are going at different speeds. And we were 51-0, nobody ever took it, which still surprises me, but it really, I think we know right away if somebody's going to ask everybody in the building if they can help out before they head home, which is the culture that we had.
Yeah.
And I think those people, those types of folks, I think they can't hide it, and when you try,
were those all, or not all, but most of those friends of one person in your company?
No, we got big enough where it was, we couldn't do it that way. We never really had a hiring manager. We never incentivized hiring because we didn't want that burden. If somebody made it 5 interviews, and we interviewed the heck out of people, but it just sort of became its own. Grateful Dead had a whole lot of band members, and I think people tagged in, tagged out, and it was just it was a thing that you kind of got.
Yeah.
And I think that we knew it when people walked in the building, and I think people also felt it when they walked in. We had plenty of people that walked in that knew that respected what we did or didn't, and they knew and we knew that it just wasn't.
Yeah, it wasn't going to fit.
We could still be friends, but yeah.
Yeah. And what were the things that operationally that you did that you were maybe surprised about doing or surprised about being good at?
Well,
like in running the business part, just making it, pushing it forward, those kind of things. Were there things that you were just naturally good at? You're like, wow, I didn't think I would ever be good at that. I
thought that operationally there would be a lot more selling and convincing of the philosophy of even our own people. We had to work hard outside of our building, but even that sort of caught on. And I thought that there would be a lot of, okay, here's how we're doing this and why we're doing it. And then again, here's how we're doing this one and why we're doing it. And after 1 or 2, people said, okay, I'm going to go do my job, I get it. Yeah, and I said, no, I've read a lot of books.
I know you don't.
Like 4. And they all say, make sure people are, and I was surprised that, I don't know how it necessarily equals operationally, but I was surprised that the systems that we put in place allowed people to be comfortable and feel like they were doing the work that they were supposed to be doing in the place they were supposed to be doing it, be part of the team. And I don't know what we really did other than encourage and define roles. We went through a really difficult growth period when we brought in that $3,000 check. We moved from the old building, which was 1,900 square feet and saloon doors on a single bathroom, across from Nickerson Street Saloon on the backside, on the Fremont side of Queen Anne Hill. And we moved into the new building, and we knew that back then that was 12, 13, 14 people, and we could still do all hands on deck, and when the project came in, then the copywriter could get the saw, and the account person would start writing some lines because the copywriter was sawing. And when we moved into the new space, we knew to get over that hump, we would have to kind of get back in our swim lanes. And that's not where the old Wex folks wanted to be. They said, oh, I remember, it was just kind of when you move spaces or move philosophies, and it wasn't even a change of people, but it was, you remember back when we all went to lunch, and it's like, we can't now because we're 30 people. But we went, and that was when we did the check, and we had a plan for everybody to leave. It was sort of like, okay, buy in, and let's sort of leave that old baggage. We're prepared for you to go. We don't want you to. And we're going to keep doing this moving forward, but we need people to commit not only to Wexley, but to the space so we can grow in the places where we have opportunities as opposed to being too busy in other, So I guess operationally in some ways, that transition, I think we were lucky. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we realized how important it was when we were in the middle of it.
Yeah. And so tell us one of the big questions is you're closing down Wexley.
Yeah.
So obviously not from financial reasons, but for partnership reasons or whatever. How'd that conversation go?
Well, I think, it's tough. It always, I don't know that always. This one started with money. We lost a client. We're pretty good at winning business, but we lost a client, so we're not closing the doors. We're not going out of business for financial reasons. We're closing the doors for philosophical reasons. But the initial problem was we lost the sparkling ice business, which we had had for a couple of years. And it was 25%. It was significant. Yeah. It was 25% of our business. We'd recovered from worse. But and then Ian and I, we've been friends for 20 years. We're still friends now. We just simply didn't agree on a couple of things. One, we didn't agree on if we wanted to take the work that would pull us out of where we were. I'm a little bit more in the digital and experiential, and he's a little bit more in the traditional media of execution. Super creative guy. Mm-hmm. I'm a pretty creative guy too. But we just had a philosophical disagreement about, especially in this region, how many clients were there around that wanted to provide us creative opportunities, which was the underlying thing, sure. In either space. You don't see a whole lot of great creative in the digital space and advertising right now because A/B testing and analytics and quantum physics rule some of that out. Yeah. So you need to find those folks. Yeah. And the traditional media has its own limitations, and we just didn't agree philosophically on what was going to be next. And combine that with the opportunities that we're getting, that we're walking in the door. We didn't have to do too much in the way of sales. We had new business people and they worked hard and did a nice job, but a cold call from Wexley School for Girls is a weird thing to get. Yeah. So our existing work is really what drove a lot of people to us. And the existing work that was coming in, especially in this town, Amazon has the biggest creative department now of all the agencies combined. And
really? So if they were an agency, they would be the biggest?
Yeah. There are 300 people, and all the creative agencies in Seattle combined, you're looking at about 50, maybe 75. Wow. And so the opportunities that were coming from that, there's a lot of money to be made at Amazon. You can go do, sure. A lot of stuff falls off the back of the truck, and you can build a business around it. Yeah. But we agreed that the opportunities that were presenting themselves for what we wanted to do, and our goal was always to have our employees say that this is the best job that they've ever had at this stage in their careers. And then when they reflect on it, we want to be in the conversation. Yeah. And we didn't see the opportunities that were coming to us as career-making creative opportunities. Neither of us did. And we also, there were a lot of acquisition conversations. There were a lot of people that were interested in just kicking the tires. And we're on the vendor list for Microsoft, for Amazon, for Google. A lot of big companies want to be in here because it's a very difficult market to break into. And Ian didn't want to put me through a 3 or 4 year earn-out with a conglomerate, and I didn't want to put him through it either. Sure. So, as difficult as it was, and we've disappointed a whole lot of people, both our employees and our clients, but we sort of made a parental decision that we just didn't see what was next, clearly.
Yeah, and in a partnership like that, you really have to be, both of you have to be 100% committed.
Yeah, and it was easy to both say the right things about what we wanted and work as a team, but when those opportunities present themselves, they truly weren't what we both wanted.
Yeah. So partnerships are never easy. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how good or bad you are. They're never easy. What would you have? What piece of advice could you give me or the audience to say? Here's what I think was really good. And here's some things that are just not that they were bad or good for you and Ian, but what could you give us advice to, like, here's some things you should just make sure gets done or doesn't get done, or like give me a couple pointers.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of answers to that. I think that that partnerships can be very difficult when they start going bad, when things start going badly,
Sure.
and you're 50-50. The thing that we both learned was when your body's on the ground and 50% of you wants to stand up and 50% of you wants to stay down, you're not standing up, and you're kind of not staying down, and you're just going to be in an uncomfortable position for a while, but nobody wins that ever.
Yeah.
So the way that you avoid that is just clear and often and out loud communication about goals and what's next, and we failed at that, at some level. And then when we failed at that, because we really didn't want to not agree with each other, we
Sure.
wanted to say creativity drives, and when we started to identify things that were drawing us in different directions, we swept that under the rug a little bit. And we were like, well, I know what we both, because we both have always really liked the end product of what we do,
Yeah.
and have different ideas on how to get there, but we started to just think a little bit too much that we were on the same page when we weren't, and we didn't really want to be confrontational when we weren't. And then probably the worst thing that we did was to each other say that everything was okay, and then to other people undermine a little, and just be like, I don't know what the hell he's thinking either. I don't even know where he is. I don't even like his clothes. And then when we're together again, it's like, everything's awesome. So, and it really, I'm really kind of putting a magnifying glass on some things because you reflect, it's like, well, there was that time where, I did say, like, I think he's crazy for thinking this is the future. And as you learn in leadership roles, there were times we did a 360 thing 5, 6, 7 years ago,
Sure.
and I didn't realize that I have a pretty significant resting bitch face. And when I'm talking to somebody, like a client on the phone, and I'm just like, what? That even if it's just through my office window, there are 15 creatives out there that are like, oh my God, Cal's pissed, we should get out of here. And I didn't realize that from a leadership, and I wasn't, I was confused, or I didn't realize that the littlest things that you do at the leadership level, at the CEO or ownership or partner level, have a ripple effect that you can not see, because the staff goes out to happy hour, or they go and talk, and it's like, I think we're going to lose client X because
Did you see?
I mean, it was insane. Is your resume ready? And then you come back, and everybody's quiet around you the next day. It's like, how's it going? They're like, are we in business? It's like, yeah, with my dad.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that there are a lot of answers there, but a lot of the learning for us came from the influence that we have over people, and then the information that we share that people take as gospel,
Yeah.
that work their way into other crowds or other groups, can cause some trouble. And this is coming from a place that I think had the best culture in the city.
Yeah.
And so I'm truly nitpicking because I don't want anybody to go through it. But those are things that are also obvious. I think that those are, or maybe they're not obvious. Maybe they're like how we intend to behave, and then it's
they're
easy
not
to
obvious
behave
when
otherwise.
you're doing them, but they're
Yeah.
obvious when you look back. It's like 2020's
Yeah.
really clear.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I realized this 4 or 5 years ago when I heard Gabe was working for you
Yeah.
guys, that you guys had, I'd heard everybody said you had such a great culture.
Yeah.
Everybody loved it there. So that was a known quantity, right? Which is great.
Yeah.
Where do you? Well, let's jump. Tell us about what you're working on next, because you're working on something.
Working on a couple things next. Yeah, and I probably should button it up by just saying the thing that Ian and I also realized is we weren't going to pull out of it. We've coexisted for a long time, and we really, really like each other a lot. So
Yeah.
we could have gone on in perpetuity. Gabe was one of the guys, and one of the women in the office just said, "Hey guys, this is getting a little too obvious." And the culture was still great, but it was let's not put people through a whole bunch of this. So the opportunities that I see moving forward, one of the things that we had a lot of folks in the startup community, and Madrona, some of the venture guys,
Sure.
And women that would come in the office and know Wexley's reputation, because we work on small clients that don't have a lot of budget. But as we got bigger, it got more expensive to work with us, because for us to do what we do well, we had to put more bodies on it. I was always really excited about the clients that a Madrona would bring in, or the startups that would come in to talk to us. And they would have, we were talking about beforehand, they might have a $500,000 operating budget. They finally had 50 grand. Their friends and family round, 50 grand for marketing, their friends and family round went pretty well. Somebody said, you need to have a brand. And they said, you're right, we need to have a brand. We're a startup. That's like totally what we need. And then they would come in and talk to us, and we would spend $30,000 figuring out how to spend their remaining 20. Yeah. And it was awful. So we wouldn't do it. Like, we couldn't take that work. But it was always so exciting to see people at the stage of their business making terrific changes and committing to growth opportunities and brand directions, and being willing to listen where you could really do terrific things. They could do terrific things. And that energy was something that you just don't have when you work at some of the giant companies. It seems like the bigger company that you work for, you either have a cavalier who's willing to do something super crazy and get fired and move on to the next thing, which is often a great person to work with, or you have somebody who's protecting their job and they're just trying to move the needle 4 or 5% up instead of 10% down, and the creative opportunities aren't there. So what's next for me is working with companies that at the Friends of Family to Series A, there's a startup fund called Stage.O that I'm really excited about, 8 companies in the portfolio. And they don't have to spend that money to work at a big agency if you have access to a smaller creative team. As we were talking about beforehand, an agency, it's not a secret sauce. There's a billable hour. Yeah. There's 33% of that billable hour that is the model for what the ultimate is to cover that person's salary. There's 30% that's covering overhead, insurance and lights and lunches, and then you try and make profit in that last third. So I think the new model is trying to do just a project fee. Agencies make money the longer they take doing shit. Like, that's how it works. Exactly. So hopefully it's good and hopefully it's worth it, and often it is, and other times it isn't, because it can take a week to get a call on the calendar. So a project fee, we don't have to worry about profit as much. The model is to only work on companies that are willing to share a little bit of equity, so we all do the upside. We can cut out a large percentage of that profit, because if I'm successful, if the company is successful, we're all successful. Yeah. And 2 exits in 3 years, and that helps. I think that one of the things that put Wexley in the position we were in is we grew into nobody ever left. And that was terrific because we loved everybody, but it also didn't create opportunity for us to hire somebody at a lower level, and we were super top heavy. And to support that, our billable hour just got like attorney heavy.
Just kept going up, yeah.
And that's because that's the only way the company can make money. So I think what's next is, manageable project fees, smaller teams, and the opportunity, because it's a business, so we intend to make some money, right? So, sure. But we'll survive on both our successes. And if it doesn't work, and it's, I like the idea of working on companies that we're invested in. And we really need success to play a huge part of that. And we make mistakes, we fail. Absolutely. And we're pretty good at recovery, but we're pretty good at failure. Yeah. And so I think, those opportunities for us to just get on board with somebody with an entrepreneurial energy that has heard no enough times, and it's not going to work enough times, and then fight through it, and just have dumb luck or blind energy like we did when we started a company with a silly name, to take some risks and make. I think that opportunities for an agency that I'm going to do, that I want to do, is getting involved not at the level where advertising is today, which is, we made this awesome thing, please go make a commercial and tell everybody about it. Sure. I think now creativity happens much earlier in brand development, in concept development, in product development, which we're capable of. As an agency, we think that way. Yeah. And you can make different things. If you look at the brands that consumers are in love with now, take away what Uber's gone through politically recently, but it's an experience. And it was a creative, thoughtful solution of how to get a bunch of limo drivers out of their lots, and to have a car come right to you when you were ready for it, like your mom picking you up at soccer practice. Like, you could control that. Yeah. And their experiences, and that's where the creativity happens. And I think that's where you can make brands successful, is that early stage, and that's where we'll focus.
Yeah, and you have to engage just so much earlier, right?
Yeah.
To be able to get into the brain space and many founders don't understand. They're sometimes too late. They're looking too late. Like, why didn't you hire me like 3 months ago when you started talking about this? And so tell me, what are some of your favorite brands? Like, what are some brands that you like that really Cal really enjoys or just cherishes, or what are some brands?
Well, I think that as an advertising person, you have great historical respects for brands. You can really love brands now that make terrible mistakes, and they don't stay in marketing mistakes. They don't stay in people's minds as long as they used to, because the consumer is so overwhelmed with messaging and that you kind of forget. I mean, H&M's, if you guys know, a couple months ago, H&M ran an ad with, I think it was Loudest Monkey in the Jungle, that came out of Sweden. They just missed it, and there were protests. It was a little African-American, but it was a black kid who was Swedish, right? Swedish, I think, British. So protests, H&M, you're going down, and nobody really remembers. And it was a mistake. You do a word cloud for Subway now, you would think, Jared, pedophile. It doesn't even come up.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't even show up. So allowing brands to make mistakes historically, I've always had great respect for the traditional ones. I think Coca-Cola is always rewarding to view. As a consumer, I want to be rewarded for the time I spend with them. Yeah. Coca-Cola, Apple, historically, those brands, what Virgin has done over the years, exciting.
What about small ones, like up-and-coming brands, like the shaver guys?
Dollar Shave Club.
Yeah, Dollar Shave Club. Or the shoe,
Tom's
shoes.
Not small anymore, but a great example of, so he's an advisor of another project that I'm doing right now. We've been friends for a number of years, and we were talking about that, buy one, give one. Blake Mykoski.
Oh, Blake.
Blake. Yeah, the guy that started Tom's, and he said, Nike and Adidas have given away more shoes and given away more money than maybe I ever will. But I get credit because it's buy one, give one. I get more credit than they ever will because I own that brand with a little bit of messaging, and that's where the creativity was. I had nothing to do with it. That's where the creativity was. So, I think that there are interesting. I think Annie's is an interesting brand. There are interesting food brands that are on the front end of organic, and it's not greenwashing. I think that there are brands that do the right thing. I thought that H&M, not a small brand, they did a fantastic job of owning responsibility and not deflecting it. I think that the consumer has such an intimate relation with brands large and small now, an intimate relationship that you can't hide, and I like brands that take ownership. Obviously we launched the Sounders at Wexley 7 years ago. I still love those guys. I think they still set the bar for how you behave in a stadium in any sport in this country and learn from all over the world. I think that they've done a really nice job keeping that as part of their ethos.
Yeah.
I think there's some really interesting small technology brands that are game changers. I think Square is a great little thing where every bank in the country could have and did, in pursuit, figure out a way to run a credit card on a phone so you can open up an ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I think they just did a really nice job with, So I think that there are, now those brands are funded.
Sure.
I don't know if I have a good example off the top of my head of a brand that wasn't funded that was successful to the level that we all know about them.
Sure. And for, a small company, what are some, what are like a couple hints or things that we should do in starting a brand? I mean, like early steps.
Sure.
Like before they hire you.
Yeah.
Like what are
before
steps?
they even have the conversation. I think that one of the key things to do is just fall out of love with your product. And I think that most products make it to a level of success at the ring of their founder's abilities, or 1 in a million, they just take off. But even at the companies in our in the fund that Stage in the fund that I'm working at, in our fund, when we're talking about different people to bring into the fund, we're small. It's small. There's 8 million. There'll be $15 million under management. But most of those founders just think the story needs to be told, and as soon as this consumer finds out, they're just going to love the fact that we really should have sock holders now.
Yeah, exactly.
Or we really should, they just think that they've solved the consumer's problems.
Sure.
I think it's really important from a brand standpoint. Certainly, let's clearly get the message that a consumer can respond to, but you need to not be so in love and think that you've solved everything, because the consumer doesn't care that you left your well-paying job to do the startup with the technology company, that you had the idea while you were there, but now you're super awesome. Consumer doesn't care.
Yeah.
Doesn't care about your version of the story often.
They want to know what it does for them. Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And in that, in those early days, again, when you have your product and you're probably in love with it because you think it's the best thing since the wheel. What would be some pitfalls that you need to avoid as a 3-person, 10-person startup?
Sure. Well, I think that you do need to stay in love with your product. So I probably overstated that a little bit. You need to stay in love with it, that you're staying true to it. I think once you have a successful product, there are a lot of little dim lights at a lot of different tunnels, and you have to stay true to the mission that you had. You have to stay true to what you set out to do, because these opportunities are going to come out of the woodwork, and all of a sudden there's a massive distribution opportunity at Starbucks, which wasn't in your model, that will change your business entirely and may go away in 4 or 5 years, and now you're the company that makes the YouTube videos.
Sure.
And I think that it's sort of, at least from my experience, our success came with staying with solve the problem first, creative idea, and then go. Because there were, in every business, and you prove success because people want to glom onto your success and go along the ride with you. So there are a lot of shiny things if you're an ostrich, and you kind of just need to stick with what your mission was to begin with. I think the pitfall is looking at opportunities just because they present themselves and wasting time.
Yeah. Yeah, not having a clear focus on the direction.
Yeah, whether that's your sales mission, your brand mission. Like, there's a lot of one of the things that I see brands do at this super early stage is spend money on sponsorships, because they're not that expensive. Sponsor the 10K, at the Wounded Dog Foundation, and you get a little banner, but it's $1,000 you don't get back, and I don't know that Wounded Dog is the right thing for you. Because you're excited about your brand and you do want people to know about it and you want to get the word out, but there are just a lot of places to spend your money where you're not getting that return on your investment. There are sort of two things that I think you would pay attention to. There's return on investment, which is fiscal, and there's the return on time, which is probably more valuable. And the time that you put into things to pursue that idea, to see if it's going to work, to talk to that person, to see, and then you're 2 weeks down the path of something that isn't going to give you the return that you were hoping for. And you're never going to be, you got to be tireless. That's why entrepreneurs are successful. You're not going to be right every time, but you need to develop the filter of, I see, yes, I might sell 100 and make 15%, but that's not in the model.
Yeah, it doesn't fit. So square peg in a round hole.
Yeah.
And in your, your daily life of being a creative, what are the things that you wish you didn't do? What are the things, like, if you had a superpower, what would, I'm not quite asking that question, but
Sure.
What are the things you wish you were better at in your world that you think would help Cal be either a better business person, or maybe Cal be a better person, or what are some things that...
There's a lot of ways that I could be a better person. I think that's a long list.
Sure, okay.
I think that that's going to take more than the question and answer period. I think that because we get experience and we gain experience, I could be a better person if I was a better listener. If I could hear somebody out and not think that I've solved their problem. It's a tough balance, because if someone's telling you an idea that you have seen not work before, there's still value in hearing them out. When people are being critical of some creative work that we've done, sometimes they don't like it, and sometimes I need to listen better because they actually are not complaining about what they think they're complaining about. They're just not hearing the message, and the only way they know how to articulate it is to complain about its execution. So that's all more about listening and being patient, and I could be a better person doing that. And I could also be on the flip side of that, I could take my own advice from a couple minutes ago and just not go down the rat hole with things that in the end are not going to be that fruitful. I tend to stay with things a tiny bit too long.
Too long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I am so hopeful that I just don't want to give up quite yet.
Yeah.
You know, I know that the body's cold.
It's really cold, frigid. And where do you see like the business, the agency business? Like, where do you think that's going to be in just the short term, like 3 to 5 years? Is it still going to be the same? I mean, is there still? Because I mean, what's interesting is that, like what you're talking about doing in the new business of focusing more on the smaller companies, being more of a partner, being way earlier in the game. I mean, all those things. Where do you think the industry's going? I mean, that's where Cal's going, but is the industry going to be the same 5 years from now? 8 years from now?
Well, I hope I'm right. And there's no strong indication that I am. But what I have seen with where we are today is that the industry business is in a lot of trouble because it's getting commoditized. Results are easily tracked in algorithms and A/B testing, and
Sure.
And the model is margins are getting squeezed, and 20 years ago it was great to be a media company when you'd make a 15% markup just for coming into work. You're at 2 or 3% now, and it's hard. I think that because there's so much accountability and trackability in the work that advertising agencies do, and you can always get it cheaper, combined with a general lack of appreciation for the creative product. There's brands that will expect creative things from. But if you think about how we experience content, not advertising content, but everything, the level of finish, we don't expect it anymore because we have blurry Facebook pictures from the birthday party, but everybody kind of gestalts that into place, and it's like, oh, I recognize those. There's no framing there, and we're now used to seeing things that don't have the level of finish which advertising companies are so good at creating,
Sure.
which means the consumers aren't going to pay for it, which means the agencies want to do it, but the brands aren't going to do it either.
Yeah, they don't want to pay for
Because
it.
the shelf life is too short and the consumer doesn't have that expectation for the vast majority of brands in the world. And you couple that with how consumer behavior is changing things. I tend to shop now, unless I'm going to the record store. If I'm on Amazon, I'm now reading reviews and not thinking about the brands as much, because even though a percentage of those may be created and may be marketed to, I still will go with taking somebody else's opinion versus being marketed to.
Yeah.
And then, so I think that's a massive problem. I think we have so much information being blasted our way that we only really have the capacity for a number of brands. And then you look at the consumer behavior. I mean, automotive spends more money than any industry in the world on advertising. And when you look at the behavior of a 25-year-old who doesn't care what lift she gets into, and could be a Volt, could be a Prius, could be a Camry, like, I don't know, just get me over there.
Exactly.
The advertising industry, and this is something that Madrona has put a paper on it not too long ago, if the future consumer doesn't care either about being in a car or not, and doesn't have the brand affinity that they've been fighting so hard to,
Sure.
to ram tough. I mean, industrial vehicles are different, it's a bad example, but what's the difference between a Ford Escape and a Prius if they're both blue and you're only going to be in it for 5 minutes?
Yeah.
So as an industry, when your biggest spender is deciding that it's not worth it to do brand differentiation, I mean, there's a lot of dead canaries.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty doomsday, and there will always be opportunities for good creative. I'm not worried about
Sure.
my job or the creative people. There will always be opportunities to put creativity into marketing and messaging. There will always be companies that need to challenger brands that need to set themselves apart. But between the commoditization of the work that people consume and the expectation by the consumer of what the information they're trying to gather,
Yeah.
it's not doomed, but there's only a handful of really good typewriter repair people here in Seattle.
For a reason. So if we're looking ahead, we're seeing user-generated content being highly valued. Like you're saying, reviews, I put that in that bucket, right?
Yep.
Reviews.
Influencer marketing, all that stuff.
Yeah, if that's going to be the lead, or somewhat the lead dog, what's the second piece of that? Like, what's the second most important piece of that for, again, I'm talking about emerging brands, like things that people have never heard of yet, or maybe slightly heard of, but how do they get, how are they going to get through that noise?
Yeah, it's difficult. I think with all of that, as doomsday as I've been, there are brands that will be disruptive in the space, have a good consumer experience, be innovative in the consumer experience space, and do need to get their messaging out there that will be famously successful. And there's probably one that we're going to find out about in 4 or 5 days.
Sure.
So it's crowded, it's cluttered. One of the titans of our industry is named David Drogan. I was in a discussion with him the other day, and he said that we're one of the few, if not the only industry where people are inventing things to avoid what we make. There's nobody who really, between TiVo historically, pop-up blockers, DVR, unplugged, premium, skip the ad, people are aggressively creating technology to not see what we do. So the opportunities there are, because most of the work is not particularly good and people don't invest in making it good, there are opportunities for brands to do great things,
sure,
and they will absolutely take off. So it's fewer and further between. So in all that racket, after all that, I would just say, creativity and a good consumer experience will launch thousands of brands over the next several years that will have marketing to thank for their success.
Yeah.
So it's there. It's going to work. Well, that's the part where I'm hoping it still works.
Yeah. But the creative piece is the important
yeah,
piece.
At every level.
Being creative at whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And feel free to ask questions, guys. Feel free to bring them on wherever you got. So I'm happy to take them. And for the startup who has, $100,000 to spend over the next 6 months, if you're the CEO, you and I just started a company.
Suspect decision, but okay.
Yeah, exactly. But so you and I started a company. You're the CEO, and we gotta get some sales, right? We gotta create some sales. Where are you gonna spend your time? What would you say, Mike? Here's the things that I think we should do, right?
Yeah.
What would you tell me? Tell us.
So I think that because it's discoverable now, that seeing where, understanding who needs our widget, and then understanding where they're most willing to receive that message are the two most important things if we'll make table stakes creativity again. I would be not exhaustive and not silly, but I would definitely make sure that we had our highest reward target in our sights. I would spend a little bit and see if we were right, and then I would stop spending if we weren't, and I would double down if we were. So I think it's still about finding the consumer. It probably will all, if we're talking about that. Well, we're talking about anything. It's about finding which consumer you think, and that I think that's one of the challenges. That's one of the places where agencies are generally pretty good. Yeah. You can do a Henry Ford Faster Horses. You can find places that are a little bit unexpected where your product works.
Sure.
And just sort of dial up that symphony of a little bit over here and a little bit less there, and you be quiet and you be louder, and look at the returns on those investments. We're learning that Facebook targeting effective.
Yeah. Definitely.
And digital space and where we're marketing, we're learning that things still work.
Yeah. Question?
Yeah, and thank you for your honesty about all this stuff, and feel free to answer this in any way that is appropriate, but I'm very interested in not so much who said what, but as far as looking at the way the industry is going, you and your partner had two different ideas of the right way to take this. And you touched on it a little bit, but I didn't quite get what option A was and option B was and I would love to hear what those were and maybe
Sure.
why one versus, I'm sure they're both valid, you guys just didn't come to agreement, but understanding what those two different roads were.
Yeah. Well, we both wanted and still want an opportunity to be creative in a space. This market is the size where you can be creative on challenger brands and run a perfectly successful business. And the challenger brands in some of those spaces, it's the creative process is never easy, but it's easier to see the results of the creative process in some traditional displays because that's where people see them.
What is that? When you say traditional, what is that?
Yeah, so for me, traditional, and for Ian also, traditional is TV, print, radio, pre-roll, more of the traditional media spend places. And he by no means is stuck there and only wants to work there, but there's a level of comfort there, and it's proven. You can do great things. We together, he alone, me alone, we've done great things as judged by our peers in those spaces. It's much harder to show that there are creative opportunities in a digital space where we've got A/B tested to death until eventually you're not testing two creative things anymore. You're testing just for effectiveness. And there hasn't been a big rush of creativity in those more digital engagement places. There hasn't been a big example of creativity working famously well. There's always some award-winning things that people wish they did more of. So I saw an opportunity to be a little bit more in that space and try and cram creative down people's throats and see if we can be excellent there. And maybe it'll be a colossal failure because I would say that it's not done particularly well right now. Obviously, the best agencies in the world are doing really well and making a lot of money in that space. And that was just a place that half the agency was not that excited about because the immediate return wasn't as good.
And the digital side, is that, right? I mean, it's still media, right? You're still paying for banner ads or whatnot. So when you're saying digital, what does that really, what are some examples of what that looks
Sure.
like?
So I think that the digital space is really attracted to clients because when you buy an outdoor board for minimum 30 days and people hate it, you don't get to take it down. When you buy a banner ad and you run one to these 50 households and run another one to these 50 households, get a better number, these 10,000 and these 10,000, you know which one is working better than the other. The digital analytics come back, they're impossible to argue with. So you might double down on this other one. Now from a creative person, this other one might say buy one, get one free. And this one over here said, wouldn't you like to take a friend to the game? And that's clearer. So right now, clarity in still paid for digital space is where clients are kind of targeting their money because they know right away. You drive by a billboard, you kind of don't know like if it's working. Which isn't to bag on the billboard business because sometimes a billboard is absolutely the best place to do a message. It just is about your now media strategy. And
So it's still media.
it's all still media.
Still media. It wasn't are we going in media or doing something else?
Yeah.
It's still a form of media. It's just whether it was print and banner or digital online.
Yeah. And we both like to add non-traditional elements, so non-paid for things, stunts, events, pylon takeovers, whatever it is. We both like to do things in the non-paid for space, either practically, like here's where we're going to build a giant safe, or here's where we're going to do a barge and throw a party. So a different kind of not paid for media, but we both like that.
So you agreed on that. It was where the money, when you were investing the money, it was the idea.
Yeah, where was
media strategy.
And I think that it still comes down to both of us seeing where is the return on our time. I mean, we know we're going to be a successful agency either path that we take. We know we're going to make money either path. We needed to make some more money right away, but it's never been a long problem for us. And it was, okay, for me, do I really want to spend a lot of time going in that space where I don't know how much longer we have the opportunity to be successful? Maybe forever. But I see those opportunities dwindling. And for him, it was, is it worth my time to learn that space, study that space, and then at the end of 3 months realize, based on work that we've already done, that our creatives are outstanding and some of the work that they did never got to see the light of day because
The A/B testing.
the A/B testing took it down.
So, but the thing that you did agree on is was there not enough work to sustain the agency doing the work that you both agreed on, which was the non-paid, more organic, experiential marketing stuff?
Yeah, I mean, more and more that non-paid part is difficult to make money on because it's an add-on to a campaign that you've committed to doing. So it was difficult to run a 40-person agency that paid people pretty well and had a pretty good profit margin, and try and bet on those executions that usually involve being pretty scrappy and trying to do something interesting in a space that doesn't have paid media around it. That's more kind of spectacle creation that is less trackable. So and I think that's really what it comes down to. We could be creative for days. He was one of the most creative guys that I've ever met. We could be creative for days, but if the clients are like, love that you guys are doing that. We know that you just hung 10,000 scarves from trees. We also wanted you to sell those. But our season ticket click-through button is dominating, so appreciate that creativity, and we both saw that. Appreciate that creativity. That's kind of a year 2 thing for us. Right now I need to show everybody that we're making a whole lot of money, and either this digital space is doing it, or this clip and save coupon is doing it, or that direct doesn't necessarily need to be on the digital space. And we're in a sales-driven, high margin or high profit margin society right now. We never recovered from the last recession, where a lot of our companies are mandating 15-20% profit margins on giant ones that used to get by on 4. So the pinch has to come from somewhere, and so people are looking for guarantees.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, just to follow up on that. There's been a shift with P&G dumping their digital media side and shifting everything to traditional, and I've seen other companies starting to follow suit, but I'm also seeing that there appears to be a lot more convergence to the technology side. How much do you think the technology is driving the convergence of media, and then how much do you think shitty analytics coming from Google and Facebook in their walled gardens is giving digital a bad rap and turning it into an unfavorable marketplace today?
I think it totally is, and the magic of Google Analytics is the interpretation then and what you can do with it. And the majority of people realize they can charge for it and don't know what to tell people and how to make it work because it's kind of trackable, right? There's a swing back to traditional because it's cheap now, because they're desperate. A lot of the traditional places need to, you can't get what you used to get for things. I think that what I'm still seeing is, even though it'll take a mix, that I'm still seeing a move towards predictability in your dollar that you spend. So for sure the pendulum is going to swing back a bit. Right now we've got massive in-house creative teams. They've always swung back from that. It'll get tired from that. They'll exist, but it'll be like, you know what? You guys are really good at doing the things we need tomorrow. We got to get big picture. And that's probably 2019 or 2020. So things will move around because the flavor of the month changes, at least every month or two.
Sure.
But I think that I'm still seeing the vast majority of marketing dollars spent to where they know what they're going to get from it. And I think that there's also probably a little, I think that big brands have moved, GEs have moved so aggressively into that space that they're doing some things kind of for show that say, hey, don't bail on us because we still count on you guys and we'll still use, it's easy to execute simply in those spaces, and sometimes that's exactly what you need. I won't say GE is doing everything for show, but there are probably some loyalties to some executions and some things that you just kind of do because as your own brand, you know what you're going to get from that. But I think the numbers are very clear about, the aggressive swap from digital spend, traditional media spending to digital spend, and it's not slowing down.
Yeah, so do you think it's a fundamental lack of understanding of the way to interpret the digital data with a lot of those bigger brands, or do you think it's just that they're comfortable with what they've got and they've become gun shy because they've been screwed at the digital company?
I think that's a really good insight because the hard thing to figure out is success there. I mean, they've turned digital just into display again, and they've lost.
Yeah, click-through visibility doesn't shit.
Yeah, it doesn't mean anything, but at the same time, there are a lot of folks that worked really hard to convince big brands that that's where all their money should go, and they're not going to talk the brands out of it right now because that's their gig.
Yeah, you're just watching other little digital advertising
Yeah.
companies like fall off the map.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, so I think that people will probably pull. I don't know how to phrase this. I think that the overall spend on digital is going to continue to go up, but there will be more of a diversification with some of the brands that are the big spenders, right? So the little guys will realize they can finally afford digital because digital prices came down because the big guys aren't spending quite as much, or they're spending it more intelligently and more targeted ways and more targeted execution. So I think the overall spend will continue to rise. We'll see rewards to other companies to do some non-traditional, some experiential, some TV again, pre-roll success. TV is really just pre-roll anymore. So we'll see that, but
And last little bit.
yeah.
If user-generated content is interesting, how do you get to that through traditional media sources?
I'm a little bit of a user-generated content snob because I don't think that it's as
As good as people think.
yeah. I think that what it is it's free and it's overwhelming. And I think that we're coming out of the era where it was like, look at this, has 1 million views. It's like, that's because you bought it. You bought 1 million views. Now, influencer marketing is kind of a combination of those things. We work with a couple companies that just stick a Dasani bottle on the hood of their car, and it's like, road trip, and they get paid because they have 230,000 Instagram followers. So that's a new rise, because that's more personal. It's like you're following this celebrity, I think we call them now because they're on the internet. But so there is that, and that's the new user-generated content. But I don't know, unboxing videos and people doing little stunts, and we haven't had sort of like a fake UGC ask in a very long time, because you just get lost. No matter what you do now, you have to pay to have people see it.
Yeah.
You can't just expect,
Yeah.
the Mentos and Diet Coke thing. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
For early stage startups that don't have any funding and can't afford agencies, do you have recommendations for books or podcasts or things that would make us smarter on the subject?
Yeah, there's so many. I'm trying to put the early stage filter on the early stage filter over it. The nice thing about it is, if you listen to podcasts that don't get too into the minutia of media, which is what I just did, and you talk a little bit, and they talk a little bit more about brand philosophy. So Dan Balzer does a really nice one, and I just know that because he was the copywriting chair at the Creative Circus, which is the school I went to a while ago. I think that Tim Ferriss does a nice job every once in a while talking about how brands find themselves and their own identities. I think that it's really I think you can skip fast forward or take it off your podcast when they start talking about how to reach and discovery and all those spends. The simplest ones I'm trying to think of. I mean, even taking it out of podcast, if there's a Malcolm Gladwell tipping point, kind of approach, which I know is 10 years old now or maybe older, but I think that technology has also lulled some of our podcasters into what Amazon does, which is when you list a product on Amazon, if you spend $200,000 on it, they will manufacture a way to make sure you get $300,000 back. That's what they do. They know exactly how to do that. So there are a lot of sort of media influence podcasts that I think you're just kind of getting way too deep into it. So yeah, I would listen to Balzer, I would listen to old Gladwell, I would listen to, who is my other?
Seth Godin?
Yeah, Seth Godin, always. Seth doesn't get too deep into it. Seth, or if he does, he knows what he's talking about, but he's good at keeping things simple.
Thank you.
Can you talk a bit about managing creatives? And you said that you'd have creatives on your team for a really long time.
Yeah.
And so how do you keep that fresh, and what's your approach for keeping a high bar high?
That was one of the big challenges that we have, and I would say that we had turnover in the creative department maybe more than any other department, but that's instead of somebody staying with us for a year and a half, they stayed with us for 4. And you lose creatives when they think they're not learning anymore, or they think they don't have any bigger opportunities. And Wexley is not the kind of place where you need to sit in the bullpen for 2 or 3 years before you get the big opportunity, because if we hire you, you're going to be working on the big opportunity tomorrow if you're the one who's available. So the burnout that we saw was really more around a little bit of experience when you don't really see. I mean, the more I'm in this business, the more I'm realizing that I kind of don't get it. But after a couple years and a couple successes, I think that creatives decide that, well, I've done this before, I know what we're going to do, and especially in the digital space, I know how to make this work, I know how to. We would lose people never to other agencies in town. We would lose people to life experiences. So they might get a little bit bored, they'll spend another year with us, and then they'll go, meet their girlfriend in San Francisco or want to go to New York or do. But keeping the creatives interested, strategy really helps. We have a really terrific strategy department, and uncovering different strategy that can kind of put a light bulb over their head, as opposed to thinking, great, shopping mom, kid in the grocery cart, refrigerated aisle. It used to be milk, now I'm selling them ice cream. We need to find different insights into how they're willing to receive messages, and our strategy department was super, super good at that. So keeping the creative challenged in a business capacity and solving a business problem, because every business problem is different, we got them pretty excited about that. And results, we get pretty good at results.
Andrew, you have a question?
Yeah, you spoke a bit about how you've seen startups waste money on sponsorships. Are there any other places where you see startups waste their time or effort and money? And also, do you see any opportunities where startups can punch above their weight?
Startups can punch above their weight when the competition just gets lazy. And in a much bigger picture, that's what Branson was so good at. Not really a startup, but it scales down. When the cab companies got lazy because they thought they had the whole monopoly, Uber came in. When Uber got lazy because they thought they had the whole market, Lyft came in. So I think punching above your weight is just looking for other people being super lazy. I probably don't know all the dumb places that startups could spend money, or where I've spent money as dumb startup. But I think that if you sort of take an old carpenter's approach to it and measure twice and spend once, even if it's just philosophical, I'm not talking about digital measurement here, I'm just talking about, all right, I think that's will work. Do you think that'll work? All right, I think that'll work. I think that the other thing that we see startups don't have the opportunity to do it as much, but smaller brands will just shotgun their spend where you really have no idea if what you're doing works. I'm on the board for a couple nonprofits, and one of the biggest things the biggest difficulties I have trying to get them to solve is $500 people what we really need? Do we need $501 people? Do we need and it's difficult to answer, but that's all part of trying to find your target. And I think that the risk is, especially because there's so many places you can spend money now, is you put a little money over here in the digital space, put a little money over here in sponsorship, put a little money over here in paying to have a presence. You're paying for your spot on a podcast. I think that sponsorship. I didn't mean to bag on sponsorship, because I love sponsorship, because a lot of sponsorship isn't done particularly well. It just is hanging a banner and you don't even know why they did. But sponsorship done well, associating with programs like this, I mean, honestly, I'm not even this is a pretty exceptional sponsorship opportunity for these guys, which is probably not breaking the bank, but they're in exactly the right space, right? So good by them, good spend. And they weren't at motocross last week. And I think that startups should just not want to be famous and put your eggs in 2 baskets, not 17, because you're spending in a place where you can't tell if you're really successful.
Suzanne?
Cal, will you talk a little bit about brand awareness versus building brand love? And they're two very different things, but I think I probably have a bias for one. But tips for building brand love?
Yeah, so one of the questions that we get a lot is, as we call ourselves a fan factory by trying to build fans of brands, brand awareness does some of the job. I think that brand love, or being a fan of a brand, as we, in the language that we use, can really only come with a combination of awareness and experience. So if you have a company that has terrific customer experience or customer service, or they're cheaper than the other guys but in a good way, then you can build ambassadorships out of that, and you can build brand love for that. That's what Apple did for so long. And awareness does not make for fans. That's why, was it Bernbach? I think you can do a whole lot of really good advertising and kill a bad product. You got to have something that people actually want, and otherwise your awareness is actually going to shorten your runway. But I think, most of the companies that we're talking about have a brand ethos in place that stick by it. That then marketing's role is just to remind you if they've slipped your mind for a little bit, and it's like, yeah, you know what, I wouldn't mind a Diet Coke actually after seeing a couple polar bears sliding around or whatever. So that is kind of reminding, and that's sort of rewarding the consumer because they became a fan, or they were aware, they liked the product, and then as a marketer, you start to create, which is one of the things that we're doing with one of our companies now, you start to create an expectation of the marketing by the people that already love your product. So you can't just mail it in, they love your product for a handful of different ways, or your service for a handful of different ways. So now you have them anticipate the marketing, so they will want to share that and say, these are the guys I've been talking about. Like what Blake did so well with. It's hard to walk down the street in a pair of Toms and not have somebody run up and tell you the story of the little Afghanistan flag that's on the back Argentinian flag that's on the back of your shoes, right, that says Tom's in it. So product, experience, messaging, what Blake does, he's truly a great dude, and that's not a show. So that combination creates those people that love brands, and then our job is just to remind people if somehow we slip their mind.
You're awesome. Thank you. One last question. Go ahead.
I'm assuming you're responsible for the Dairy Gold truck.
Ian is responsible for I can't take credit for that. Yeah, Ian is responsible for the Dairy Gold truck, and Pat Mullins and that crew.
Because maybe you're not the person to comment on it, but I thought it was brilliant. And I don't understand, it's not a traditional media spend, but you've got these things that are like
Sure.
billboards, and I just don't understand why more companies are not using them in the way they can use them.
Well, that's exactly how we sold that campaign, so I can talk about that. We'd been wanting them to do that for a while because they have this fleet, and it's not prohibitively expensive anymore to wrap trucks. And you see more of it. It's not the most unique solution of all time, but when we talked about the route of those trucks and how much it would cost to pay for an outdoor campaign on that I-5 corridor versus having it up constantly and driving up and down the corridor for months, it became a much easier sell. So it was just twisting the perspective. I think it's a pretty terrific idea for brands to use what we did from the very beginning when most of the companies we worked with didn't have money to market, didn't have money to pay for us. We look for every opportunity to make a creative impression. So if you got a fleet of trucks, use your fleet of trucks because you can't afford billboards, or maybe you shouldn't because it's cheaper. If you're Nike in your Nike town, make the swoosh your door handle. Don't make a normal, look for every opportunity to reinforce that you're being thoughtful as a brand. And you're also finding places, everybody knows what to expect when you're looking at a billboard. You're going to look at a billboard. But when a truck pulls up with spilled milk or crates of milk or yeah. Stacks of butter, or just one long piece, that's unexpected, and people will reward you as a brand for time that they invested in it, because you as a brand invested in giving them a little giggle, in their daily lives in a place they didn't think they were going to see it.
Well, again, it's been done a lot, but I don't think as well.
Yeah, those guys really did a nice job on that one.
So, a question I'd like to ask every guest: how did you make the first dollar you ever made that wasn't from a relative?
Well, I'm from Detroit, so make or steal.
So make. So somebody willingly gave you compensation, which was monetary,
Yeah.
for a job that you did for them. What was your first job? How old were you?
My first job was as a caddy, and so I was 14. So that was the first time I got a paycheck.
Okay.
But I had been shoveling driveways when it snowed and raking leaves from a pretty young age. And that's when I realized that my dad wanted me to shovel the driveway for nothing, and Mr. O'Neill would give me $10.
Exactly.
So
Mr. O'Neill got your attention.
yeah, so Dad didn't get the driveway shoveled until
Mr.
after
O'Neill.
dark, and he was already home.
That's awesome.
But I think a lot of entrepreneurs, I think that we find a way to make money, and that's a much nicer dollar to put in your pocket than the first paycheck was for me anyway.
Absolutely. Well, it's great having you here. Thanks for sharing and being so honest with your breakup. That's never an easy process.
Yeah. Well, we still like each other, so I would hope he would say good things too.
Yeah, that's great. And we will be at the same spot the last Tuesday of next month with Howard B. Har, one of the ex-presidents of Starbucks. We'll be sitting here in that chair. So be safe, have a great month, and have a wonderful night. Thanks, Cal.
I know. Appreciate it. Thanks, Mike.